What is up, and welcome back to the DLF YouTube channel. We are here with our team preview series. We're presented by DynastyLeagueFootball.com, your premium source for Dynasty football content. And today we're here to talk about a team you don't hear very much about ever in the news, hardly at all. Honestly, you would almost forget they exist. The Green Bay Packers, just so boring. Never anything exciting going on over there in Green Bay. But we'll introduce them to you. We'll let you guys know what the Packers are all about. We're going to talk a lot about, obviously, Aaron Rodgers, and, we're not going to focus too much on that because you probably have heard enough. But, hey, new wide receiver in town, a good rookie wide receiver in town, and a running back that's not there anymore. So we're going to talk all about all those different things. I got some great guests. I'll introduce them to you right after this short video, but you'll know them. You know who they are. They're very smart, and they happen to be Packers fans. So they pay a lot of attention to this team, and we'll give you their takes. They'll help us break it down right after this. Let's talk Packers. Right here to my left, I've got Mr. Pat Fitzmaurice. Definitely know him from his rankings. He is the most accurate ranker, I believe. Was it last year, the year before, Pat?
Regular season. Blind squirrel finds an acorn. So good year at Fantasy Pros in their accuracy contest. So.
Host of the Fitz on Fantasy podcast and a ranker you got on the footballgirl.com and with Football Guys now, right?
Correct.
Yeah, very cool. Appreciate you joining the show. And then I'm going to go Tara. Tara, I know you very well from the Vipercast. Good friend. It's been nice getting to know you for sure. Tara's very smart. She just did what's really hard to do, a YouTube series by herself every day for 30 days. Where she did It's Tara Time. Make sure you go check that out on Dynasty Vipers YouTube channel. Tara, how are you?
I'm doing great. I'm excited to be here on your show now, so this is incredible. I'm really happy to be joining you.
I appreciate you taking that time. And then we've got Jake and Dustin. Dustin, I'll introduce you first, man, co-host there with Jake on the Drinking and Talking Fantasy Football podcast, and proudly having your Badgers and your Packers flag right there behind you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Got to represent Wisconsin, This is the show to do it. So have to pull out all my homerism. Really excited to be here and talking about the Packers. So thanks for having me on.
Yeah, appreciate you joining us. And Jake, if you don't see him on that show with Dustin, he's also with the Ball Blast. He's a co-host there as well. Or just on Twitter, like making up songs and like having them go viral.
I don't know about viral, but I feel like there's a certain section of Twitter that appreciates it.
No doubt. Anytime I see something come up, on my timeline that's got you in it, I know it's going to be funny and good, entertaining. So make sure you're following all these people. They're really bright. They're smart. They're going to help us break down this team. So we know, obviously, the big headline was Aaron Rodgers. That went back and forth. That was quite a saga. That it's time, glad we're past that. But let's talk about what else we're looking for. It's not the only thing going on with this team. Pat, start with you. What kind of storylines, camp battles are you paying the most attention to when you're watching the Packers?
Yeah, I mean, we were talking about this a little backstage, Cal, and I think with the Packers, it's almost kind of the interesting stuff is sort of at the periphery. Like Kylan Hill, who might be one injury away from maybe a significant role in this team. Kind of an interesting college career. Is he going to be able to do anything in the preseason and show out? Josiah DeGuara, who they spent a third-round pick on last year, only got 2 games in last year, but he's kind of an interesting Swiss Army knife kind of tight end, H-back in that offense. Might he do anything at all? And, I guess at the bottom of the wide receiver depth charts, can Equanimeous St. Brown make the roster now that they've added Cobb? It's kind of the smaller stuff. I think a lot of this stuff's kind of in place already, and we kind of know what the roles are going to be. So it's like these guys you're going to maybe have on your waiver wire Rolodex for fantasy, break glass in case of emergency guys.
Right. And I think, some of that's going to be fantasy relevant. Like you said, some of it is not. Some of it, is, we're looking for it in the future. But what about like preseason? Like, is there anything, Dustin, you're looking at in the preseason that could change your opinion on somebody fantasy wise? Anything?
I guess Jake and I were kind of talking about this on our show on Tuesday with Randall Cobb coming to town. And this was all obviously before he signed, but that was one of Aaron's favorite targets, before he left town. And, we were talking about fantasy implications and if he's going to be fantasy relevant for this season. He's got that familiarity with Rodgers from the past, but this is a totally different offense than what he had before when he was there when McCarthy was the coach. So I'm just kind of keeping an eye on, is that chemistry still there and how does he fit into this offense? Obviously, we all think he's going to slide right into that slot receiver role that we thought Amari Rodgers was going to take over. But that's kind of the one thing I'm really looking at here as far as the fantasy implications for this season.
Yeah, that was something that happened this week. I don't think the GM sounded too pleased about it. Like he was like, you got your way, Aaron. But, I guess obviously he's not the one that has to figure out how to put him on the field. Coach is going to have to do that. What do you think, Tara? Do you think LaFleur gets him out there and his chemistry with Rodgers is pretty good if he's on the field, right?
Yeah, and honestly, that's something that I'm going to be paying super attention to because, selfishly, I was very excited about Amari Rodgers. I've been kind of, very high on once you get past that first tier of rookie receivers. When you start looking at the Terrace Marshalls and the Kadarius Tonys, I really thought that Amari Rodgers was the person who was the most well-positioned to immediately be able to step on the field and start to build his capabilities and have, a more clear path to fantasy relevance. So, the Randall signing, the Randall Cobb signing is kind of, it's awesome because, I'm happy that Rodgers is getting his guys and what he wants. And I do think that, a lot of people think that Randall Cobb is washed, and I don't see it that way. Is he somebody who I'm going to be immediately jumping to put on my roster and thinking that he's going to be someone I can roll out to a flex position, even in a deep league? Probably not. But it does take away from that potential that I thought that Amari Rodgers had to be able to become fantasy relevant. So that's definitely something I'm watching because I do think that rapport is needed. I mean, we need a slot receiver immediately. So it's wide open, and it's very possible that Cobb can come in there and immediately be able to make that impact.
Yeah, and it does diminish Rodgers a little bit, right, Jake? I mean, I think if nothing else, puts it where you're thinking about maybe 2022.
Yeah, I'm not willingly drafting him in redraft this year. I'm avoiding it. And he may be a waiver wire darling halfway through the season, and that's fine. And then I will act accordingly. But no, as of right now, I'm treating it as if Randall Cobb is absolutely the guy, which does help Aaron a lot. I still don't love Randall Cobb for fantasy this year either. I don't know that I will ever love a wide receiver 2 for fantasy in Green Bay ever again until they prove it. But it does help Aaron, and that's what I'm about.
And anybody else, feel free to jump in here. But Jake, let me just ask you, that's interesting that you say that because I think we've been waiting for somebody to have value there. And I think every year we kind of prognosticate that, right? That somebody's going to be the wide receiver 2 and have some fantasy value. You think you sound way more pessimistic, I think, than most people.
Yeah, ironically, though, the last person who was highly fantasy relevant as the wide receiver 2 was Randall Cobb, but that was back in 2014. It's been so long since it's happened. And I love Randall. I'm repping the Randall shirt right now, but I think he really just clutters up that entire wide receiver 2 argument about who it's going to be. I don't know. I mean, he's great because when the play breaks down for Aaron Rodgers, that is his guy. And so just based on that, I could see him having relevance, but it's one of those, I got to see it again before I can really invest.
Devontae Adams seemed super excited to have Cobb back today. Did you see that video of him kind of skipping into practice after that? I wonder if it's going to just be one of those things that his role is going to be in the offense, going to be pretty defined, but he's just kind of there that he's going to help some of these young guys along. And I don't know. Does it take like what we know for Alan Lazard and all, Tara? Like, is Alan Lazard just not somebody we're going to be super interested in Dynasty or in fantasy anymore?
Yeah, unfortunately not. I mean, from my perspective, I personally thought that he had, I mean, if you're looking at consistency capabilities, I was putting him, definitely ahead of MVS. But in terms of the ability to step on the field and have one of those big games where they can make a big impact, he's not really that type of player to me. So it does take away a lot from him. I'm also I'm not worried about Tanyan, but I was kind of hopeful that Tanyan would, I saw a little news that maybe they would try and get, some more targets and a little more attention to Tanyan. And now I kind of wonder how this is going to affect him, just because he was such a great asset last year. And with the catch rate that he had, I think it was close to 90%, kind of crazy that, it would really benefit to give him a little more attention and see what he could add to the team. So yeah, it'll be interesting to watch.
The tight ends are definitely somebody to watch for sure. And then, AJ Dillon, we haven't talked about yet, but there's quite a few people that I think could fall under this category. Dustin, I'll ask you this question first, and then we can go around from there. But if someone on this team is a sleeper, somebody that we're not necessarily thinking about, or maybe they're just underrated, who do you think that would be?
I guess I would have to say MVS. As much as it pains me, because he makes all the really hard catches and he makes the big plays, but when it's like just laid up for him right there to hit his hands, that's when he drops the ball. But I think this is going to be the season where he puts it all together. And I know, I think myself included, I don't think there is like a true number 2 that we can count on with this offense to be fantasy relevant. But I think MVS is going to kind of come into his own this season. And I think he could be a reliable flex player or bye-week fill-in for your team.
Interesting. Pat, what do you think? You think, you mentioned a couple of guys there. Kylan Hill was interesting. Do you have an idea for who might be a sleeper for us?
Well, Cal, I think for fantasy purposes, it is going to be Cobb, because Cobb had basically been left for dead by fantasy managers coming into the season. A total afterthought, not getting drafted in 20 rounds, 12-team best balls. And now, I think I'm going to wind up sticking him probably in the 50s at wide receiver. And I kind of think he is the wide receiver 2 for Green Bay. And I don't think he's totally washed up. It's going to be his age 31 season. I think it's August 22nd. He turns 31. Mm-hmm. And if you look at the efficiency, obviously durability is a big thing with Cobb. He's kind of a slightly built guy. But in that 2014 season that Jake referenced, when we had our last viable wide receiver 2, and Cobb went for almost 1,300 yards, 90 receptions, 12 touchdowns, crazy good year that, he could never live up to again, seemingly. But still, in the interim, not bad. But that big year, I think his yards per target was 10.1. 2 years ago in Dallas, he went over 800 yards and his yards per target were 10.0. And last year in Houston, not a lot of targets to go on because he was hurt. But 9.1, which is a perfectly respectable number. So still efficient. Maybe you guys can weigh in on this, but don't we think now that this is the one bone the organization has thrown to Aaron Rodgers as far as personnel, bringing his old slot receiver back, Aaron's going to make this work, isn't he? And kind of the irony is the one thing the organization did was they finally got him this receiver in Amari Rodgers, and this just murders Amari Rodgers' 2021 value. For Dynasty, I'm still excited about him. I know that, back in the spring, I had Alex Dunlap of Roster Watch on my podcast, and he goes to the Senior Bowl every year, and he was really excited about Amari Rodgers. He said Amari Rodgers had a fantastic week. And the last guy, he had really raved about to me as far as having a great Senior Bowl week was Deebo Samuel, who wasn't really on my radar at the time. And, Deebo has obviously kind of balled out since then. So I'm excited about Amari long term, but I think the Cobb return just kills him. And I actually think Cobb could be like kind of an end of the bench guy in a typical 12-team fantasy league this year.
You say left for dead, and anybody jump in here and comment on what Pat just said, but 118 or wide receiver 117 on the latest DLF ADP. There's left for dead, and then there's whatever that is.
Yeah. You know what's crazy? I was actually excited about getting him as a last end of bench guy when he was in Houston, thinking the only viable option they have there is Brandon Cooks. That's it. And the worse the quarterback, the better the situation probably for Randall Cobb in that role there. So I was thinking, hey, he could maybe have some utility. But Pat, I do love what you said about the spitefulness. I'm putting words maybe in your mouth like Schefter did in Rodgers. But the spitefulness of Rodgers could lead to an amazing season for Cobb. You're exactly right. Like, let me prove to you to let this guy go and why it's awesome to bring him back. 100 targets, 1,000 yards. Yeah, I could actually see that.
Now that you guys talk about it, I really didn't think that he would be someone that I would want to go out and get, but maybe it kind of compares to, and not the same type of talent, obviously, but Brady going out and getting Gronk and bringing him back in, and there was a clear connection there. Maybe it wasn't incredibly consistent, but he clearly wants to connect with Gronk. And as the season went on and they were able to get more acclimated together, Gronk was able to get back in football shape. He was very usable. So maybe it's that kind of situation as well. And we don't have to worry about Randall Cobb getting back into football shape. And I think he's very motivated too, because I did see the video where he said he had seen the other side in Houston, and he's so happy to be out of there. So you're right. It could be a good situation.
So that's a great point that I had not considered, that he is going to make that work. And I love the connection there with Gronk and maybe even Antonio Brown for Tom Brady, right? Like he kind of vouched for him, wanted the organization to bring him in. They did. And you like, if he's complaining about not getting, that kind of voice, he might want to make it happen. I love that. That's really good stuff. Really good stuff. All right. What about on the other side? Is there anybody that maybe we're drafting too high, that if we think this person could be a bust this year, who would that be? Pat, we'll start with you.
I think Tunyon, unfortunately. I mean, I like the guy a lot, but Tara referenced the insane catch rate, like 90% catch rate. I mean, we're going to see an efficiency drop there. He went nuclear in that game against Atlanta, where he had almost 100 yards and 3 touchdowns. And that was a game where Adams and I think Lazard were both out. There was another game where one of the few games where he didn't have a touchdown catch, I think was against the Bears. That was like his second biggest yardage game, where was it Adams and Lazard? Maybe it was just Lazard out, but bottom line, I think he was over 50 yards only 3 times on the year, had that crazy catch rate, had the really crazy touchdown rates. And now we've just added another receiver. So there's actually like a group of complementary receivers to Adams with, Cobb, MVS, and Lazard now. So, I mean, I just don't think he's going to have a big enough. And plus, I mentioned Josiah DeGuara earlier, as one of these fringe guys, who might steal some snaps from him. So I don't think he should be drafted as a top 15 tight end. And he's going to consistently go ahead of guys like Zach Ertz, Irv Smith, even Anthony Ferkser. And really, I think Tunyon should probably not be drafted anywhere near the middle rounds of a fantasy draft. And that's where he's going to go.
Going at the tight end 11 right now, according to DLF's ADP, which is firmly in that top 15, which doesn't feel like it takes much to get there, but it does feel like that if somebody's going to bust, that could be a pretty good option. Dustin, what do you think? Whether it's him or somebody else, who do you think could be overdrafted this year?
No, my first thought was Tunyon as well. It is as much as I love the guy, it was great to see him break out, because he literally came out of nowhere last year. You know, didn't do much for the first 2 years he was in the league, and then all of a sudden had this great year. And, you know, he had 11 touchdowns last year, which is insane for when you compare it to the amount of yards he had. You know, so I see that number regressing quite a bit this season. And yeah, I just don't see him sustaining that production that he had with that insane catch rate. You know, had a lot of goal line or red zone targets there to get him those touchdowns. And just drafting him in those middle rounds it's going to be a mistake. As much as it pains my heart to say it, there are much better options out there for you this season.
Jake, who do you think?
As much as it pains me, I am the avoid mid-round tight end guy. That is not, I avoid at all costs. If you don't get your top 3 guys, wait it out until the bitter end. And I mean the bitter end. Maybe don't even draft one. Take somebody off of waivers 2 weeks before the season starts. I don't care. The one thing that I do have to give some props to Tunyon for, because that's also the first name that popped up, is though he was top 3 in terms of passer rating when targeted amongst all NFL players last year. And some of that I'm sure was due to the easy lobs that he got in the end zone in a couple of those games. But the 2 guys ahead of him had like 20 targets. So basically he's the number 1 in terms of passer rating when targeted. And I know how much that means to Aaron Rodgers. Like that type of thing, that reliability, that consistency does mean a lot. So I will not be drafting him personally because, again, I avoid it, and he's 11th. I won't do it. But it's hard for me to call him a bust. I'm actually worried A.J. Dillon right now could be the odd man out in this offense. I think Aaron Jones gets run into the ground, gets the receptions that Jamal Williams would have had before he left. And A.J. Dillon, I think, is going to be touchdown dependent. And I waver on it, but right now I'm not willing to take Dillon.
Really interesting. Tara, lots of Tunyon talk. We're going to go back to Tunyon or AJ Dillon. That's a good option too. He is right now going off as we've got AJ Green, listen to me. Aaron Jones going off as the RB15, and then AJ Dillon's the RB33.
Oh, yeah, that is a good point. Yeah, I'm going to leave Tunyon alone. I agree with what everyone was saying. I was hopeful that prior to the Randall Cobb signing that he was going to maybe see a little attention, but I think that kind of put that a little bit dead in water for him potentially. But I like the AJ Dillon one is interesting. I never thought of it from an overdrafted perspective in terms of his ADP because for me, he's arguably one of the top 3 handcuffs in the league. And so with that said, I mean, if anything happens, God forbid, to Aaron Jones or he misses a few games, we know for a fact that he can step in there and produce a multiple touchdown, 100-yard game. We know that he's capable of that. We saw that, Jamal Williams was incredibly fantasy relevant when he had to step in and be the starter and replace Aaron Jones last year. So from that perspective, I was high on him. But I think you're right in terms of ADP, that makes a lot of sense that he could be considered a bust because they are likely going to push a lot of those things that Jamal Williams left behind to Aaron Jones. And he might not be as potentially flex relevant as people might be hoping and pushing him to. So I agree. In terms of getting a handcuff, he's right up there with me for Latavius Murray. But I get worried if people are thinking that he's going to be someone that they can plug in and rely on.
Sometimes go ahead.
Yeah, I agree. I don't see him returning that low end RB3 value, barring injury to Aaron Jones. I mean, there's other guys I'd rather have that flyer on. Like you said, if you're drafting him purely as a handcuff, I'm fine with that. But if you're expecting like a weekly production like we saw from Jamal Williams last year, I just don't see that happening.
RB33 feels higher than a handcuff. Where do you have him, Pat?
I think it's around 33. He's kind of a handcuff plus. And what Jake is saying is interesting. What if Dillon is sort of being overvalued at that? If he doesn't really return low-end RB3 value, then where should we have Jones? If Jones is the guy who's going to be the getting all these passing down snaps that, Jamal Williams was getting a lot of last year.
Hmm.
I mean, we should probably have Jones as like a top 6, top 7 back, right? Maybe ahead of Saquon Barkley with his knee issues, maybe ahead of Zeke, who at times looked pretty pedestrian last year. I mean, yeah, like maybe he's a pretty viable mid-first round option.
That's really interesting. Yeah, go ahead, Tara.
I was just going to say, I mean, for me, my kind of like, and it's not like a super hot take, but I feel like Aaron Jones is, one of the most disrespected running backs out there. It's kind of crazy to me. He can easily be provided, like if he plays 15, 16 games, I think he'll be a top 3 RB this year. The injuries that he had last season are really the only thing that kind of held him back. If you look at it from that perspective, there's no reason that I don't think that he won't repeat the production that he had last year, and potentially more, with kind of like this fire and this motivation that Rodgers is coming back with. And then I think Aaron Jones has a lot of motivation as well. And when you look at the contract and wanting to, do well over this year and next year as well. So I think it's highly possible that he can go out there and maybe get a good 1,300 yards on the ground, keep up that same average that he had, maybe get a little bit more pass work. And then you're looking at somebody who, in my opinion, is going to overperform where people are drafting him.
Every now and then a running back comes along and we want him to get more work and he just doesn't. And I guess we're going to find out, like, was Jamal Williams getting work because he was good, or is it like they were wanting to split up where Aaron Jones didn't get everything? And it's Pat's right. Like, gosh, we're way undervaluing him if he's going to ultimately get a larger share of the workload. And you kind of go back to Rodgers, and I guess there, you could probably say that Devontae Adams, but Aaron Jones might be the biggest beneficiary of Aaron Rodgers coming back.
From an efficiency standpoint, I think 100%, which is always where Aaron Jones has made his hay. He's never been the high volume guy like we're talking here. If you're going to do a heads up versus Zeke and Aaron Jones, yeah, of course it's going to be Zeke getting twice as much volume, but Aaron Jones has always been uber efficient. And I don't think his rushing percentage increases at all. It might even take a small downtick with A.J. Dillon there. But yes, that receiving work is going to more than make up for that. I think he's easily in the top 8 conversation, and I do have him over Zeke in my rankings.
Very cool. So sometimes these questions are easy, like this one: who's going to lead this team in targets? Does anybody have a hot take? Is not Devontae Adams?
No, maybe it's gonna be Brian Gutekunst. He's gonna chuck it at his face like every other play just to prove a point, and they can put that down as a target. Maybe that's my hot take.
Yeah. Does anyone get half as many as Adams? Is probably the question.
That is interesting because, I mean, like that would still be a pretty decent number. I mean, I guess, and if not, then I guess, is it possible if they don't, that Aaron Rodgers doesn't have quite as good a year as he had last year? I mean, that's, that would be interesting to see. Rush attempt seems kind of easy on this team too, though, right? Like, it's going to be Aaron Jones. There's almost no, unless Aaron Jones wins the lottery and doesn't play football, it's going to be Aaron Jones, right?
Mm-hmm. In rush attempts, here's the thing. I think it could be a 50-50 split in rush attempts between Dillon and Aaron Jones, and it wouldn't shock me. Like, I wouldn't be super surprised if that happened. Obviously, the value is still going to be crazy higher for Aaron Jones, but I guess there's an argument maybe there.
What would you project if A.J. Dillon were to get the, 60% of the work, Pat? Like, what would you... How high would we want to draft him? I mean, would you be ranking him as a RB2?
Yeah, I mean, like if there was some sort of, say, early preseason injury to Aaron Jones that left his early season availability in doubt, I think we would see Dillon creep up into the 5th or 6th round because, I mean, there's the draft capital. There's the Quadzilla thing, just the the kind of powerful back he is. And the one time he got some run last year, I mean, he left the frozen bodies of Titans defenders in Lambeau Field just like laying waste to the Tennessee defense, which granted looked pretty disinterested on a cold night in Lambeau Field last year, but it was quite an impressive RB1 audition for A.J. Dillon last year. So the only thing that would like kind of temper my enthusiasm about him if he did ascend to that RB1 role through an injury to Aaron Jones would be just the lack of pass catching ability. It's just not something he ever really did at Boston College. The body type suggests that that's not really going to be his forte. So, that limits a lot of guys, save for Derrick Henry. He's maybe the one guy who can return massive value without being much of a pass catcher. But I think you kind of need that in your arsenal to be like one of the real ultra backs for fantasy.
Yeah, I think in that if he could get that role, that he would. He has soft enough hands that he could catch the ball. I think we saw that in some of the limited action we saw last year. It's not like he was stone hands, Jordan Howard, where he was just dropping passes all over the place. Like, he looked good on some of those routes and was catching the ball well. So, not saying he has the Aaron Jones level of pass catchability, but I think he would be serviceable, maybe more in that like Chris Carson type level, where you're, maybe 30 to 40 receptions on the season, if he had a bigger role in that offense.
Jake, I want to just talk about how crazy it is that Aaron Rodgers is what Aaron Rodgers is right now, because and just kind of get your temperature on what you expect out of him this year, because last year he had the 24th most pass attempts, 9th most passing yards, and the most touchdowns. Those numbers don't usually go together, but that's just how amazing he was. Do you expect him to come back with that kind of a vengeance, with this potentially being his last year in Green Bay?
It's just, are we even sure that he's going to be the starter for sure week 1, though? I think we need to address that before we get into this. No, I do think, though, it's crazy because, yes, obviously nobody expected what he did last year, myself included. I was not expecting that. But the second year in that offense, yes, everything went up, as you said. The efficiency went through the roof. The touchdowns, remarkable. His career average is going to be sitting much lower than that 48 passing touchdowns. But if he comes down to, let's say, 35, which I think is a very respectable number, based on how they operate this offense, I'm still fighting my homerism of trying to work him in to like the top 6 or 7 quarterbacks for fantasy this year. I don't think I'm ultimately going to be able to do it, but a top 10 finish is 100% within the range of outcomes, based purely on everybody being there, everybody staying healthy. Lazard was out for a chunk of last year too. Cobb, we don't have to bank on his consistent health as long as somebody can fill his shoes. If that happens and he gets 35 touchdowns, he's still going to be a top 10 guy because that offense is so efficient. It's that LaFleur, it's the old Titans offense that it banks on efficiency. So I don't see as much regression as people might want out of this. So I'm still putting him in my top 10.
Tara, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree. It was a crazy year and an outlier, but it wasn't that far off from an outlier. We know he can throw 40 touchdowns, not once, not twice. We know that's something that's well within the realm of possibility. I think, over 4,000 yards is to be expected for him this year, especially with the extra game. So that's not a reach for me. So again, it comes back to the offense as a whole. I just really do believe in LaFleur's offense. And I believe in Rodgers' ability to thrive in it. And yeah, the touchdowns will come down, but I think that, 35 would be a low end for me. I think it's highly possible he could hit 40 again, especially when you consider the situation that there might be a little last dance kind of extra motivation going on for him right now. So I do think that he'll definitely be a top 10 in terms of production.
That last dance stuff was so weird. I don't know what they were doing. Pat, you're a numbers guy. You look at those numbers. Is there part of you that feels like you got to regress it a little bit, or do you feel like that's just more in line with what you expect?
Oh yeah, I think the laws of gravity say the touchdown rate is going to come down, but for Aaron Rodgers, you're still going to keep that touchdown rate above the league average. So we don't know where that is going to land, but I like right now I've got him QB7. I think there's a clear number one tier with Mahomes, Allen, Murray, Lamar Jackson, and Dak Prescott, and then there's a tier break, and then I think it's Russell Wilson and Aaron Rodgers, and like I'm seeing Justin Herbert get drafted ahead of Aaron Rodgers, which I think is just an epic mistake. Epic mistake. I would prop anyone who wants to bet me that Justin Herbert is going to score more points in fantasy than Aaron Rodgers this year. Like I'll take it all day long.
Yeah, that's going to be interesting to see. You know, Justin Herbert. I think we're sometimes we do this where we annoy people a little bit too quickly, and you know he's got changing coaches. There's a lot of moving parts over there for Justin Herbert, right?
Sure, and we talk about regression. I mean, a guy who had that sort of monster rookie year. Like I think there's, we've heard the term sophomore slump before. Like I think he was pretty much operating at the height of his powers. Although, like, and this isn't a Charger show, but like I know that the play calling did him no favors last year, and he actually like really outperformed considering how often they ran the ball on first down and how often they threw on like second and third and long. So, you know, maybe Herbert has that going for him, but I do think there's going to be a little pullback there. And I'd just much rather have Rodgers. I mean, who's the better quarterback? There's no question in my mind, you know?
Dustin, so I got two more questions for everybody. This will be the first of those two. Dustin, is Aaron Rodgers the quarterback of this team in 2022?
I think I'm going to say yes. I think he's going to play so well this season that they're not going to have a choice but to re-sign him for one more season. I think if he's going to, as we've said, go out and prove it. He's going to have that chip on his shoulder. He's going to play terrific this season. Maybe not quite to the level as last year, but it's going to be to the level where the management is going to be like, oh God, we got to ride with him for one more year. He's going to, you know, maybe try to break the bank a little bit, get that just 1 year deal. And then he'll, especially if they don't win the Super Bowl. I think if they win the Super Bowl, there's not a chance he'll come back. He got his second ring and he'll go somewhere else. But I think if they're on the brink of winning the Super Bowl, you know, maybe they make it and don't win, I think he would try to come back just because you have all the pieces in place for that run. That I think he would. But it would come at a very steep price for the team.
Jake, you look surprised.
Look, one of Jordan Love or Aaron Rodgers is gone in 2022. That's my belief. So if you drafted that guy as a first-round pick and you admit your mistake, which the Packers front office does not seem super willing to do, then you would just trade Jordan Love for whatever you can get and say, we're sticking with Aaron Rodgers because, like Dustin said, like he's proven us that he can win it or almost win it, whatever. But if you're stubborn like they are, I think you just say, we're finally going to play this kid that we've been trying to hype up and get active here for the last 2 years. And I don't know that Aaron would, without a lot more concessions than just Randall Cobb coming back to the team, would be willing to stick it out there. And I don't think that Jordy Nelson is going to pick up the phone and come back to save him in 2022. I don't think Charles Woodson is going to be ready to suit up for him in 2022 to make that happen. So I would be very shocked if he starts in 2022.
Tara?
Yeah, I'm not on the. Yeah, I've been saying you're good to go with drafting him for this year. You don't know where he will be for next year. I'm on the edge of I don't think that he'll be back for 2022. Because even if it goes really well, even if they acquiesce and give him that, you know, that Tom Brady level of control and personnel and whatnot, and give him the respect that he wants, financially, how do we make it all work? I haven't dug into the numbers. I'm kind of curious, but we've got a lot of contracts lining up, and I don't know. I'd just be kind of curious how it all works out. And I know he wants certain people to say, so how do we make him and Devontae and guys on defense, how do we make it all work? So I'd be kind of curious about that.
Good question. Pat, what do you think?
Brian Gutekunst would really have to put his tail between his legs for Rodgers to be back in 2022, which might not happen since the Packer fan base is less in the Rodgers corner maybe than I thought. I'm not sure what the percentile breakdown is, but there are a lot of people, Packers fans, who think Rodgers is a prima donna. And so, if it was just overwhelmingly people recognizing that, the Gutekunst 2020 draft was just probably the worst Packer fans have seen since Mike Sherman's infamous Ahmad Carroll, Joey Thomas trade up to draft a punter draft. And I forget what year that was, just an absolute fiasco. And 2020 really wasn't much better. But I'm kind of leaning against him being back. I mean, obviously I'm pulling for that, but I kind of think it's better than 50-50 that he's gone.
That news conference was kind of a masterclass in getting your point across, wasn't it? I mean, I thought he was really good at that.
It was. I mean, he said a few things. There were a couple slip-ups that made him sound like kind of an egomaniac, just a couple little things. Maybe he could have spared the comment about Green Bay not being a vacation destination and, people wanting to come and play with him. But it's kind of true. Like, people want their shot at a ring. And, here he's one of the 5 best quarterbacks to ever play the game. And that definitely improves your odds of, getting your championship, something every player wants to do. But it was, without going complete scorched earth, he still kind of went scorched earth. And It was clearly aimed at one guy. And, he did it in a kind of a measured and sensible way.
So you mentioned the ring. So it brings us to our last question here. A team that maybe has a chance to chase a ring this year. Certainly, was really close last year. Jake, we'll start with you and we'll go around the horn here. 17-game season. What do you think the Packers' record is in 2021?
Somehow it's still going to be 13-3. I don't know how, but somehow it's going to be the 3rd year in a row of that. They're going to cancel a game. I don't know. I think a reasonable outlook would still be, it's tough to put this team anywhere below 10 or 11 wins. It just is, because everybody, basically the band is back together plus a little something extra. So it's probably a homer outlook, but I'm willing to take 13-4 for this year. I think is a reasonable outlook.
Tara?
Yeah, I'm with Jake. I've seen somewhere where people are saying, that we'll go 11-6, and I feel that's just disrespectful. I think it's crazy. I mean, when you look at our schedule, you can clearly identify. It's not a very hard schedule because we've still got those in-conference games that are going to, carry us to an automatic amount of wins, because I don't see us losing in division really, except for maybe one loss. But when you look at those games that might be a little bit difficult for us, in terms of playing the Chiefs and the Ravens and the Rams, Washington maybe. So there's losses to be had. I think 13-4 is reasonable. I think that we could honestly maybe, and I'll be a homer and say that maybe we could win out in the division and maybe pull off a 14-3 if we attack those games that are a little bit more difficult very hard.
I noticed you didn't mention the Saints and Taysom Hill there in a game you were scared of.
I'm so sorry. I am. I'm waiting until they announce Taysom as the court. I'm waiting until that happens, and then I'll put them up there in my tier 1.
Now we have the game plan on Taysom. Do you not remember he was with the Packers for 6 months? We know all of his tricks. We're not scared, Cal.
Yep. Homecoming. Just, the reunion of Taysom Hill against the Packers. Epic. Dustin, what do you think? What's the record of the Green Bay Packers?
Oh, I think I'm going to be the Debbie Downer here of the group. I'm going to say they're about 10 or 11 wins, realistically. While in division, we're going to run the division. I don't see anything changing that anytime soon. But there are some games that could take us by surprise on this schedule. And so that's why I have them at 11.
Pat?
Yeah, Tara's going to be mad at me, but I am going to say 11-5. And I'm actually I'm kind of excited about what the defense could be. Rashawn Gary was starting to show signs of turning into a monster last year. You know, Preston Smith maybe motivated after the bad season, and you know, we add a little more infrastructure to our secondary with the first round draft pick. But I'm kind of worried about, you know, Bakhtiari tore his ACL on like New Year's Eve day. Like that was pretty late. Is he going to be back and not having Lindsley? So I kind of worry that maybe the offense isn't really clicking right away in September. And you know, as Dustin mentioned, like there are some pretty tricky out of division games. So, you know, 11-5 or excuse me, 11-6 wouldn't be too bad. I think that's still going to win the division by a game or two, leave us in a decent playoff spot, although probably not playing home games in Lambeau Field in the late January.
Well, I appreciate every single one of you guys for taking your time and coming on and helping us break down this team. And I think you know, it's an exciting team. There's I think there are a lot of questions. I know we talked about that a little bit, Pat, you know, just in terms of after that main one, you know, the top tier. And there might be some fantasy value to be had. We will definitely see. But I appreciate for Jake, for Tara, for Dusty, for Pat. I'm at Calvin and Hobby with DLF Football. Make sure you go check out the premium subscription, like I mentioned. And make sure you subscribe to this channel. Make sure you go hit the thumbs up button, all of that stuff. Jake, any last words?
Go Pack, go. Man, those are the only words I need to say. No, thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you guys. And yeah, appreciate you tuning in. We'll